Hello and welcome to the TID Water and Power Podcast. I'm your host, Constance Anderson, and on this month's episode, we're discussing public power. Community-owned utilities across the nation, including TID, just celebrated Public Power Week, a week-long celebration of all things public power. Much like the region TID serves, the communities served by community-owned power rely on lower rates, more reliable service, and continued investment in their community. On this episode, I'm joined by American Public Power Association President and Chief Executive Officer Scott Corwin to discuss the importance and the value of public power and APPA's role in promoting public power. Mr. Corwin, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me here today.
All right. As we do with all of our guests, would you start by giving our listeners a little bit about your background, how you came to APPA and everything that transpired before that?
Sure. Thanks. Yes. And I grew up in the West, in Oregon, actually, Portland area for the most part, and ended up going back to school in the East and got into government and policy and went into work in Washington, D.C. And on and off for the next decade, worked in Washington, mostly in the United States Senate. And went to law school in between, actually back in Seattle at University of Washington. But I ended up really falling in love with the policy side of the world and stayed in that for a while. And as we were looking to move west, my wife and I, to raise a family, ended up back in Oregon and worked in the legislature for a little bit, running the speaker's office. Worked for an investor-owned utility briefly, actually, in the Portland area, and then came into the cooperative side of power for a generation and transmission cooperative. After that, ended up running something called the Public Power Council for 12 years, where we represented the customers of the Bonneville Power Administration in federal proceedings and before Bonneville. And then from there, ended up running the Northwest Public Power Association, which had a combination of some advocacy across 10 states in the West, and on the federal side for advocacy, but also did a lot of education and training of utilities and communications. From there, just in the last year, started hearing about this opening at APPA, and it sounded like a great way to take that background and skill set and try it at the national level, come back to DC, and it's been really a wonderful adventure over the last few months and just the last month and a half being here at APPA.
Excellent. Well, it sounds like you've traversed some miles from coast to coast over the years.
Yeah, a lot of back and forth, and then even in that time running public power associations in the West, came back to DC quite often to testify or to come to the legislative rallies. So yeah, it's been a lot of back and forth, but really came to love the public power business model and advocating around that. And so it was just a real nice fit to come back here and try that at the national level.
Excellent. Well, I have to admit, you are the first nationally recognized guest that we have had on the TID Water and Power Podcast. So we are very appreciative of you taking the time to join us today and meet with us.
Well, I'm honored to be here. I've really, and I'm specifically on Turlock. We're a member of the last organization I ran as well, and have really appreciated getting to know your folks there and great leadership of that organization with a great history. In fact, I have one of the DVD copies of The Irrigationist, the history of the organization.
Nice.
And really impressed. Really, by the way, extremely well done. If your listeners have never, I think you probably have it on your website.
We do.
Now, if the listeners haven't pulled it up, they really should. It's a professional level documentary that could be on PBS, or it's extremely well shot, well written, well narrated, great music, and just those old the folks that were the pioneers in public power, especially with Turlock back in the day, like the famous engineer Roy Meikle, just really inspiring.
Well, thank you so much. That is huge kudos coming from you. So I appreciate that. That's great. Okay, well, let's talk some public power, shall we?
Sure.
So I think that, power in general is kind of one of those things that so long as folks flip the light switch and the lights come on, they don't really give much consideration to power, where it comes from, or if it's an IOU or a POU that's providing that power. So let's just start with kind of a basic level of what is public power.
Yeah, at its most basic, we define it as not-for-profit, community-owned utilities. One of the more important differences is that not-for-profit dynamic, because right off the bat, you're able to provide costs that are lower from not having a built-in return on investment or return to shareholders that you would in a for-profit entity. But I think even more to the point, when you have customers owning the utility and the governance of the utility is directly responsive to those customers in the community, it creates a culture and a public service dynamic in the utility, and just a connection to the community. Folks live and work there and govern it. It's a really nice, as I said, a nice business model with a lot of advantages to it.
Right. And I think it's that communicating that message of what does community owned mean, right? Because we can use that term, but sometimes that doesn't always resonate with our community members, that they are in fact the owners. How do you, when you're talking to people on the street, how do you kind of communicate what that means to be community owned, to be an owner of your utility?
I think one of the best ways to talk about it is that you have a say, you have a vote. It is local governance. Whether it's in public power, we have different forms. We have power districts, irrigation districts, cities, public utility districts that's slightly different in each state and slightly different in each locality. And city councils oversee, sometimes it's committees, but the bottom line in the end is it's answering to the consumers that own the utility. So you have a say. And I think also importantly, that folks will listen to you and are responsive to you as a consumer. There's more of a interaction often with the relationships that the activity in the community itself you'll see from the utility, and engagement in community affairs. A lot of utilities do that, but I think in public power that's one way to talk about this personal investment in our local areas.
Sure. And I know that's something that Turlock Irrigation District strives for. So I hope that that's something that our consumers, our customers are noticing and appreciating. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the American Public Power Association. What is it, and what are kind of the main areas of focus for the organization?
We're a national trade association that's the voice of not-for-profit community-owned utilities. And what that really means is we were created to help support utilities that in their efforts in the communities to best serve those consumers and to do it safe, reliably, and at the lowest cost. These days, what that means as well is we're trying to help shape the future of the power industry and help drive a new era of community service. And that means really partnering with communities on how best we can help at the federal and national level of what you're trying to achieve locally. So there's a lot that happens in Washington, D.C., but for us, that means first listening to the members at home on what's challenging them, what their opportunities are, and how we can best assist that at the national level.
Excellent. And we're definitely, I have a few more questions for you regarding advocacy a little bit later in our time together. But I wanted to kind of touch on just a few of sort of the main drivers behind APPA, if you will. And one that we don't experience a ton of here in Turlock, but mutual aid is something that I know you guys help coordinate state to state, interstate. That happens a lot more for some of our utility friends in either hurricane areas, tornado areas, just severe storm areas. And typically we're on the fortunate side of those weather issues that we're not struck by that as often. But what sort of role does APPA play in helping to organize some of these mutual aid efforts?
Yeah, we play a pretty active role because even though there is certainly a lot of mutual aid agreements at the local and regional level, especially when larger storms hit, it tends to cross those areas. And so, for example, in Hurricane Idalia that was just last month, our staff tracks the developments on that really closely. They work in tandem with not just other public power utilities in the area, but also the electric cooperatives and the investor-owned utilities as well. And then the federal agencies that are involved, FEMA and the others. And they make sure that we're trying to stay out ahead of the issues coming at us in order to both be as responsive as possible, to stay as reliable as possible, the way utilities are setting up their systems as the storm's coming in and preparing their crews, but also to be as resilient as possible once the outages come. So a lot of this is in the mutual aid side. You hear about the back end of it when you've got folks coming in from other areas to help reconstruct systems. But there's a lot of preparation up front to mitigate the possible levels of damage. And in that instance, in the Southeast, it actually that hurricane didn't hit as much on the public power areas, but hit more severely in a cooperative area and some of the investor-owned utility areas. And we were able to help organize the crews coming in from the public power areas and work with the statewide associations as well to make sure that you had the best response possible. And it's a really collaborative approach. It's really heartening and inspiring to see that level of activity across different utilities to be able to bring those customers back online as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a great resource. Let's talk a little bit about education and trainings that APPA provides for its members.
Yes, we've got a lot of different areas, and we focus in information sharing and networking, which is part of that education, and really on the communications side of the world as well. And that happens in a lot of different ways through communities online where folks are sharing information, through events, workshops, conferences. But then we also have, direct educations and courses and certificate programs as well, so that utilities are able to send their staff or bring the classes in-house right there at the utility. Sure. And we arrange the trainings and make sure that the trainers and those staff at the utilities have the resources they need to become more expert or even for brand new staff for onboarding. There's a whole array of trainings across all areas of utility operations and management, including governance as well for the policymakers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's something that I think we appreciate district-wide is every corner of what we do here at TID, there's some benefit to be gained from the educational opportunities that APPA provides, whether it's on the engineering side, on the communication side, on, like you said, the governance side. So that's really helpful. So I know that APPA was formed in 1940. Can you tell us a little bit about the history or the story about how it came about? Were there 3 different utilities having coffee one day and they said, hey, let's create an organization to help each other out? Or how'd that happen?
Well, it was close to that, relatively speaking, because we're now at around close to 1,500 utilities. But it did start officially with 40 meeting in Washington, D.C. in September of 1940. But before that, even in the 30s, they had started discussions with smaller groups and just trying to share information and connect. And also part of the driving factor was to connect these smaller towns and more rural areas that had been skipped over by the investor-owned utilities of the day, who were focused more on more concentrated, populated areas because it was easier to serve, more economic to serve the denser the population. So these outlying areas or smaller towns started to talk with each other and say, how are we going to build the system out, and where are we going to get the expertise to do that, and who's going to advocate for us in Washington, D.C., where we want federal legislation or have interaction with federal agencies to do that. And that's how it came about. And actually, there's a California connection all the way back. The first president to oversee that effort was E.F. Scattergood from LA DWP. So Los Angeles, the vice president at the time was from Kansas. But those 40 that met were from different states from all across the country.
Very cool. Excellent. All right. So let's talk about who APPA represents. So you mentioned that there are, what'd you say, 1,500 members currently?
Yeah.
And let's talk a little bit about the makeup of what these member agencies look like.
Certainly. And there's actually 2,000, close to 2,000 if you count there's a lot of very small public power utilities that are not officially members, but we represent everybody, and it's about close to 50 million people represented. It's about 1 in 7 customers in the United States. And like I said, it's all forms of folks, utilities that are community owned and not for profit in towns and cities across the country. And but a lot of them serve areas much broader than that outside of towns and cities, especially where you have larger utility districts in some states. So it's a lot of different forms of utilities that takes, but it's also all shapes and sizes as well. And because 90% of those utilities that I mentioned across the country have 20,000 customers or less, and actually half of our membership are under 2,000 customers. So it's a lot of it's very large footprint across 49 states and 5 U.S. territories. And then you've got, all the way from the smallest to the largest, and geographically about as diverse as you can be. And from a generation standpoint as well, about as diverse as you can be, with folks still with coal, gas, nuclear, hydro, wind, solar, diesel, you name it.
A little sprinkling of everything.
Uh-huh.
Can you give us some examples of who some of the larger public power agencies might be, some cities or names that listeners might recognize? And then maybe an example of one of the smaller ones that you know about and how many customers they represent.
Sure, you betcha. In fact, I mentioned one already. Los Angeles is certainly one of the largest. The territory of Puerto Rico is actually one of the larger ones. Long Island Power Authority in New York, Salt River Project down there around the Phoenix area in Arizona. Another in California, Sacramento, is one of the larger as well. So there's an array. And then on the smaller side, there's some right down into towns of just several hundred people. There's even some districts that only serve one or two commercial customers. So it's really all shapes and sizes.
And how challenging is that in trying to support all of these different utilities, because they are so diverse, because they are so, foundationally similar, but individually very diverse? That must be a challenge for APPA in how you kind of represent all of them at once.
I do think it's part of the strength, though. There's a lot of diversity, but when you can bring folks together and speak with one voice on an issue, it means that much more, right? Because, even with the diversity, this set of cities and towns and community-owned utilities really care about this issue and can speak to it in that sense. And we have some good, we rely on the members to let us know what they need. And from a diversity standpoint in education and training, that certainly takes a lot of different shapes and sizes and topics. In advocacy, it certainly does as well. But in advocacy, we also have a very considered process to make sure that we can speak for that diversity across our membership. And so we have a resolutions process, for example, where folks can come to our meetings and at our legislative rally meeting in Washington, D.C. every winter, and at our annual meeting in June, and have their voices heard and make sure that we're representing them and their views on these issues. And so I think we get to good resolutions that way that can speak strongly on an issue, even if it has a lot of different opinions coming into it.
Sure. Let's stay kind of on that advocacy theme for a minute. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work that APPA does in DC as far as regulatory issues, working with the legislature on different priorities?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we work on the advocacy side. We work, and for that matter, the information sharing side coming out of DC, we're monitoring and working with certainly the executive branch as well as the legislative branch and the judicial branch as well. So, all different aspects to that. And what that means is sometimes being involved with the regulations coming out of the law and tracking those and making sure that they work for public power. If we've worked really hard on an issue, we want to make sure it's got a law passed, that it's implemented appropriately, that it still benefits public power. Obviously, working to defend against legislation and regulations that are harmful to public power is front and center, and then being involved in litigation when necessary as well. We do that through we have a great staff at APPA across all these areas: education and grid security and advocacy, and our back office staff is great as well to support all of that. But where the real strength is in that advocacy side is, again, with our membership. We can inform and we can advocate some here, but having that strength of 1,500 members and their policymakers and mayors and city council members and folks and district commissioners being willing to come to town or contact their policymakers locally, being able to, especially, because we are part of the community and we do know the people that vote in these communities and are part of the fabric of those communities that these policymakers work with every day. That has a lot of strength. So that's a really important part of that advocacy piece.
Sure.
As far as issues, I can talk a little bit about some of those if you would like to.
Yeah, absolutely.
More specifics. This year, the ones that rise to the top are issues that speak to some of the real challenges and opportunities in our industry right now, and especially for public power, but really for all electric utilities right now. Some of these are are issues that have needed work for a long time. And we're finally starting to make some progress, but we'd really like to see more progress. So permitting reform is one of those, for example. This is where you have layers and layers of federal laws and regulations, state laws as well. We focus more on the federal side, but just to get a new transmission line sited, or even just to do the vegetation management on existing transmission lines if they cross federal lands, can take way too long. Same with siting and building new generation. Even just relicensing your current generation and a utility, an irrigation district like Turlock certainly knows this very well. But if you're trying to relicense a hydropower project, for example, extremely lengthy process, can take years and years. And some of these things that it makes common sense in some of these areas. You can still have the studies and the protections you need for stewardship and across the lands. The bottom line, though, is it could all be done quicker, and most folks looking at it see
Absolutely.
that right away. So that's one. Supply chain constraints right now are a big one too.
Sure.
And again, we're trying to work so that we don't have new regulations coming in that make supply chain constraints on equipment such as transformers even worse. There's an energy efficiency standard that's been proposed by the Department of Energy that would make transformers even tougher to get. And there's already long timelines right now to order transformers. And so, but there's several issues on supply chain like that where the federal government really we want to make sure they're helping, not hurting, and recognizing what's needed at the local level. We're also weighing in on the regulations around greenhouse gases that have come out. We work on grid security issues in several different ways, both cyber security and physical security. Again, trying to have the federal government be helpful there and not pass proposals that make it more difficult for utilities to make sure their systems are secure. And then we're always working on the financial issues and financial side as well. And some of that's follow-up from some progress that was made on tax policy in the last session. And also there's an array of grants out now too from legislation in the last couple of years that we're trying to help facilitate for public power members.
Oh, that's excellent. There's definitely no shortage of topics to be addressed. That's for sure. And I feel like, a lot of these, the regulations that come out of certain legislation and whatnot, I feel like it starts in a good place and it's trying to be beneficial in one way or another. But a lot of times, the experts, APPA, aren't brought into the fold soon enough. And they kind of put the cart before the horse in a lot of situations in creating some of these regulations. Do you find that in trying to kind of have a more proactive relationship with some of these regulations that come through, or is it more that kind of watchdog perspective of trying to make sure that they do the least amount of harm for the utilities that you're working with?
But certainly we try to be proactive and we have pretty good relationships across town here on we're not a partisan organization. We have expertise to bring to bear, and our members have a lot of expertise to bring to the issues. So it is the goal is to stay ahead of proposals that would come out and not have to be reactive. And there's a lot of ways we do that by commenting when the ideas first come up, but also by even before there's a proposal on the table, by educating Congress and regulatory agencies about what we do in the power business and what it takes to deliver safe, affordable power locally. So that is definitely the goal. And then when things come up, if they're just in the nascent stages where there's an informational hearing on a topic, we make sure that we're reaching out to our membership and bringing in folks that can testify and weigh in and try to avoid negative proposals that you have to react to. We also have a lot of committees with expertise from our members that populate those committees that, for example, on reliability, they work and there's a constant flow of work on the reliability side for the agencies that regulate that at the federal and regional level, where our members are involved. And then we have high-level meetings with leaders of our membership as well, with leaders of these federal agencies, to make sure they understand the concerns before things get too far that could be harmful. So yeah, absolutely. You want to be out ahead of it if you can.
Very good. And you kind of answered my question already. I was going to ask you, in what way can a member organization like Turlock Irrigation District support the APPA's efforts in advocacy? And I know you mentioned, testifying on behalf of different matters or being part of these committees or subcommittees. Is that kind of the best way for member agencies to support the work that APPA is doing?
Yes, those are great ways to support the work. Modesto and Turlock there together, have partnered over time on some of your projects. And so when people ask us about, irrigation projects and the coupling with power there, those utilities that have that expertise like yours are really great sources that way. Turlock specifically has had, you've done several things like that, where answering surveys, having folks populate committees, being a demonstration of reliability. I know Turlock is what we call a reliable public power provider designation at the platinum level. That helps educate others on what it takes to deliver that type of service to a community. So that's helpful too. You're also a smart energy provider, which is a designation that APPA does on proficiency in energy efficiency and renewable energy and environmental initiatives. So those types of engagements are really important for educating and allowing us to be able to advocate around what it takes to deliver power to the customers locally in a reliable way.
Yeah, and we're thanks for mentioning that. We're really proud of our designations as smart energy providers and reliable power providers. So thank you for that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit. I know we've kind of already talked about the importance and the value of public power and the difference between, public power owned utilities and IOUs, which are investor owned utilities. But let's kind of dive a little bit more into the value of public power and kind of what that means at the local level.
Yeah, I think we discussed some of that, and I just mentioned and used you as an example for reliability. The public power, actually, the average outage time for public power utilities in the United States is around 80 minutes a year. That's almost double for other business model types. So that's a really impressive. So what it means in that instance is public power locally is reliable. It's responsive to the needs of its consumers, and that's priority one. I think there's a lot of other elements to the value of public power locally, and I think you in each area it takes different forms on the relationship of the community to its utility. And so you'll have examples at Turlock that differ from other areas, but part of that value is just really good customer service and listening to the customers on what they want for products and services out of their utility. And some areas are up for different initiatives more than others, but right down to the type of power supply or the type of whether they are wanting to see everything on an app and be able to pay their bills there and monitor their own energy use there. There's a lot of things that utilities are doing with their local consumers, and in the public power realm, that relationship with their consumers enables a lot of really great creativity and innovation.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's truly at least something that we're working hard to communicate with our customers is just that connection to the community, that we want to hear from them, that we want them to be a part of the process. You mentioned that, the public power takes a number of different shapes and forms. And for our listeners, TID has a locally elected board of directors. So that kind of governs our agency. But the cool thing about that is that the directors are all members of the community. So they're here. They know the needs of the community. They know what issues we're facing and make decisions directly in the best interest of our customers here in the area.
Yeah, and I think Turloc's done a really good job. Part of it is a lot of it is making sure the lines of communications are open between not just from you out to your consumers, but your consumers coming back to you. And in your community, in fact, Turlock won one of our highest awards, the Sue Kelly Community Service Award, just a year and a half ago for that, that set of community good neighbor activities that demonstrate that commitment. So that's a real feather in the cap, noting that commitment to community service that Turlock won. And then I think, golly, almost every year you get Excellence in Public Power Communications Awards, which will be announced. This year's will be announced next month, coming up at our conference. I think it's going to be held in San Antonio. So.
That's right.
But that's important, and it shows a dedication to that, and it's and it goes from the top down. I know your CEO Michelle Reimers is a great communicator, formerly in that realm herself, and is dedicated to making sure that you're in touch with your community that way.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that is a big platform of hers, is just that transparency and that information sharing, and really wanting the community to know what happens at TID, how we make our decisions, and always sharing information and putting that communication at the forefront. So we certainly appreciate her in that way. Okay, so we talked a little bit about some of the priorities that you're currently working on at the federal level, which are, represent some of the challenges that public power utilities are facing right now. I know another one that is always on our mind is just workforce challenges. Can you talk a little bit about what other utilities might be seeing in the way of workforce, and if that's a challenge for them?
Yes, it's a challenge. It's broadly across the country, and there's several factors to that. One is just the amount of work coming at us. So there's a labor market that's been tight, certainly, and then within the skills and trades, even tighter in some areas. You mix with that the cost factors hitting utilities and ability to. And in some areas, the cost of housing and other inflation going up. So being able to afford to attract and retain this talent and train them up is, at the same time that you had a large wave in our industry of retirements, that creates a large challenge. And what I mean by the demand for that increasing in a lot of areas, if you look at the array of issues that utilities are facing from some of these shifts in our industry, which have been coming at us relatively quickly, it creates a whole nother need. So you've got a lot of the same need for the talent and and folks to operate the utility that we've always had. At the same time, they're now facing these strains on the systems due to shifts in generation from some of your historic baseload resources. The generation that can follow load ramps up and ramps down, and then on a minute by minute, hour by hour, daily basis. When you've got intermittent resource, a lot of it more intermittent resources like wind and solar coming on the system. When you've got new threats like on the cyber side to the technology that we're trying to deploy, when you've got increasing loads coming up from more use of electricity generally, especially in some areas where you have large server farms and other loads like that showing up, but even in areas where it's just increased use of electricity for all purposes, including now buildings and the transportation sector and electric vehicles. It's just and then the other challenges I mentioned earlier with supply chain, and it's a whole array of issues that we need the people and the technology, but people with the skills to address them. And so, yeah, there's a whole array of workforce challenges, but I think public power is in a good position to recruit and retain and train, and especially making sure that we're retaining the talent that's in our local communities and showing them the values we were talking about public power and why it's a great place to work and great service for the community that you work in to be a part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you mentioned the challenge of folks retiring and needing to replace those people in that, historical industry information. But at the same time, I like the point that you brought up about how just the industry itself is changing. So even current employees are being asked to do more, to learn different skills, to make, help process some of these transitions. I think that's a really important point. So thanks for that.
Yeah, we find, utility, especially in our industry, it's always changing, and most people are up for being that lifelong learner. It makes the job interesting when there's always new things evolving, and we try to focus our education and training and workforce development activities at APPA on making sure that the base needs are met, but also looking to the future. In that sense, because like you said, it's not necessarily just the new folks coming into the industry or people coming out of college or out of trade schools. It's folks retraining or coming back into the industry and making sure they have the resources they need to learn the new skills that are necessary.
Absolutely. And I think another thing that is a challenge for us anyway, from our workforce standpoint, is a lot of people don't realize the opportunities that exist at public power organizations. That, it's not just linemen climbing poles, that there's accounting and there's engineers and there's communications folks and a whole variety of opportunities just at your local public power or public power utility. So helping to communicate, some of those opportunities is something that I know we've picked up some tips from APPA on.
Yeah, and it can be fun as well. We have like the line worker rodeo where folks are coming and they learn tricks from each other that way, but they also have a lot of fun just competing. And there's a lot of different ways to go at that and make sure that you're bringing in new folks that can see how interesting our industry is.
Absolutely. So I know you mentioned it earlier, electrification is an issue that TID is working through, or a challenge that we're responding to. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Of course, here in California, we have any number of mandates that are kind of steering the electrification process, and we're doing our best to plan for that and be prepared for that as we move into that territory. What are you seeing kind of across the nation with regard to the electrification movement?
We're seeing a lot of different activities and it's coming on at different rates in different areas, certainly across the nation, as far as how much electrification is happening and in what forms. But it's certainly an issue, and especially in areas where there are, the mandates and policy, that's pushing that. But I think it's a wave that is coming regardless. And what tends to happen when you see waves like that, and it's happened in the past in our industry as well, is it comes on and starts ramping up, but then all of a sudden you can see a ramp that looks really steep and geometric rather than mathematical as you have heavy adoption, and it sort of snowballs in that sense. And so that's why I mentioned there's a lot of activity across the board on that, where both at federal level, at the national labs that the Department of Energy runs, at the Electric Power Research Institute, a lot of activity just trying to study, what the implications are and how to manage that over time and how to optimize it. But and then there's a lot of trends that circle around that set of issues, both in, the biggest question, or one of the biggest questions, is where, electrification is one element of just trying to express a shift in what the form of the energy we use is, but how do we get that much generation if that comes all at one time? And especially, how do you get it as you're retiring large thermal plants, especially coal, going offline over the next several years? You have a large volume of generation you're losing. So how do you meet that presumed large demand that's already upon us and increasing every day?
That's right. The demand is only going to get greater. That's for sure. So I'm going to circle back to something that you mentioned earlier, and that is the fun that we have at Public Power, because we do have a lot of fun, including Public Power Utilities just celebrated Public Power Week. What can you tell me about Public Power Week?
Well, Public Power Week it's every year, the first week of October. It's a way that we celebrate everything that is public power and the community service and the local connection between utilities and the customers. And it's just a great way, not just from the communication side, but certainly we have on our website a set of tools and pieces that folks can use to highlight public power in their areas, right down to coloring pages for kids and things. But it's also, it's really a time to take the opportunity to have events in the local communities. So it's communications, but it's also community affairs and community engagement. And that takes a lot of different forms across our membership. Folks will have, events where the customers can come and check out equipment and talk to utility staff and see the trucks and have, there's a lot of times there's food involved and other fun activities. But it's also a way to focus on the kinds of things that, we can do to celebrate these communities year round.
Yeah, absolutely. A way to have fun with our customers, but also slip a little bit of education in there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about telling the story, and that involves a lot of different aspects. But I think it's also, like we were talking about workforce, it's a nice way to draw people into the opportunities involved at a utility too. I mean, it's a really nice place to work. The people that are at public power utilities know that. It's a way to show that for others that you meet, and show that public power is fun.
That's right. Well, Mr. Corwin, I know we're limited on time, and you've got a lot to do taking care of public power across the nation. But I don't want to let you go without talking about some of the exciting projects that are happening in public power right now. Any that come to mind for you?
Yes, well, one that comes to mind, you know well, and I'm sure you've talked about on other podcasts. But I would note that your Project Nexus right there in Turlock is certainly exciting to those of us outside of your area as well, because it's really breaking new ground. I think I'm sure you've had a lot of national folks already starting to come through to talk with you about it, and we'll be tracking it. But that project where you're putting solar over canals and really getting creative to solve issues and creating synergies between the space that you're given there, and it's really impressive. And that's one that's exciting. There's projects like that, and not exactly like that one, but creative projects in a lot of the public power communities around the country. Some of the ones you see a lot of excitement about are a little further out as far as implementation potentially, but they create a lot of interest, and such as the advanced nuclear projects, and they take there's several different forms of those and different sizes of those and pilots across the country, but public power is involved with several of those. And then a neat one that's of a different type, but it's a public power project that APPA took on several years ago to try to help lead and help organize people around, is one by the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority called Light Up Navajo, where, and a lot of folks don't realize this, they had a significant percentage still of the people in that area without electricity at all. And they're still, to this today, this has been going on several years. We've made a lot of progress, electrified a lot of those homes, but there's still over 13,000 left without electricity there. So, wow. And this is a project where crews from other utilities around the country can come and help just come in on a temporary basis, like a mutual aid without a storm, and help bring in power to this area. So it's really moving when you hear the stories of the linemen will come back and say, I was there when this family got their power for the first time.
Gosh, can you imagine I get goosebumps just thinking about it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mentioned at the beginning of our time together that most people turn on a light switch, and so long as their lights come on, they don't even think about where it comes from. But imagine coming from a place where that light switch doesn't even exist, where it's not even an opportunity. That's a pretty remarkable project. So thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah, sure. It is. It's really moving, and it lines up really nicely with the history of what public power was trying to achieve from the very beginning. And really, even before APPA formed, even the late part of the 19th century into the early parts of the 20th century, but to see that we still have these missions to accomplish, and that people are rallying to the cause, it really is inspiring.
That's right. Well, and I think that's a huge benefit of APPA in general, is that rallying folks together. I know that we have certainly benefited here at TID from just networking with our counterparts in similar areas and talking through different issues. And, APPA provides the platform for that. So I know that's something that we're very appreciative of.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So before I let you go, can you give me, because as we mentioned, you are relatively new in this post as the CEO. Can you give us kind of your top 3 goals that you're looking to accomplish in your time here at the helm?
Sure. I mean, there's short-term and long-term goals, and my goals by definition are what my members wish us to get done and what our board and executive committee want us to get done. So I'm going to first make sure I'm really listening and ramping up on this since I am I've only been here a short time. But when I look at those and the goals that they have, certainly on the advocacy side, I'd like to see us make significant progress, especially on these ones that just make sense, like permitting reform and supply chain, and really start to make headway there. I'm going to work across boundaries in DC and with the other organizations to do that. On grid security, certainly being able to bring the resources to bear and enhance our services and make sure we're staffed up to enable our utilities to meet that challenge, which threatens anyone with a computer, but certainly all of our members every day. On the cyber side, but also physical now. And then we have an association excellence pillar under our strategy as well. That's just making sure that we are listening to our members, but also making sure that their experience with APPA is the best it can be, whether it's just signing on to our system to sign up for a class, or how we're able to, as you pointed out, facilitate and bring people together and enable them to be together. So part of my focus is just making sure that we have the resources here, that our really good staff is enabled to help our members in any way possible. And that just means getting better at what we do every day.
That's a good pursuit for anyone, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, Mr. Corwin, thank you again so much. As I mentioned, we're excited that you took the time for us today. We're thrilled to have someone representing such a robust and nationally recognized organization as APPA on the TID Water and Power Podcast with us. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for having me, and I really appreciate it. It's been fun.
Thank you for tuning in to the TID Water and Power Podcast. You can find TID on Facebook at facebook.com/TurlockID, on Instagram and Twitter at TurlockID, and on LinkedIn as the Turlock Irrigation District. I'm your host, Constance Anderson. We'll see you again next time.